Okay, I think that we're just gonna make a start at this time. It is the Wednesday, the 25th, and again, time for us to meet a little bit on an optional basis for review of the key points of this week's chapter on our course. So let me just share my screen and we'll make a start with today's mini summary session of the important things that we wanted to discuss this week. So I think that at this point you should be able to see my screen. Um like always, I try to offer these weekly sessions where I provide kind of a nutshell version of everything that's important as the key takeaways from each week's material that we're covering on this online course. At the same time, I do want to recognize that just for the sake of management and sake of keeping it all doable, these sessions are kind of just a condensed version, the full story, full lecture videos, all that you will find on your Canvas course. And I've spent quite a bit of time to make sure that those videos are fairly extensive and go into a great amount of detail. There's also other than just videos available for you, pages of learning, and obviously you always have your textbook to resort back to. So it is week 10 of our course, and last week we kind of moved away from looking at the skeletal system, first skeletal tissues and cartilages, and then we moved on to looking at individual bones. We reviewed quite a bit of materials, and then last week was the time when we moved on to look at the general muscle tissue concepts. What are muscles, and having that basic appreciation. On this course, our main focus is going to be on the skeletal muscles. There's going to be also smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. We'll leave those for later chapters that you'll get to look at. I think especially on BIO202 course of this sequence of courses. But our focus for this week will be heavily on the skeletal muscles, the most important prominent muscles that you often think of that help us to generate movements. How this connects with everything we've learned so far, we saw that muscles typically cross over joints in your skeletal system, in that way creating movement. So there is a logic behind of the order, how I'm wanting to cover chapters and so on. I'm just jumping backwards to have a look. I think that I made a slight error here, and the slide should really say that we're looking at the homework for chapter 10, reviewing the concepts of chapter 10. Um, there's a little bit of um, kind of, I wouldn't say that it's illogical, but the textbook jumps around a little bit. So we're talking about the actual muscles. We're moving away from talking of the muscle tissues in general. As always, however, before I jump into that nutshell review of the chapter content, it is important for me that I am giving you similar experiences as students in my face-to-face classes would have. And one of the things that we've been working on recently has been looking at a little bit of more of a self-care through check-in, how things are going in the class. Obviously, it works a little better when the group is bigger and we can have more interactive nature. But fear not, I have prepared that we can do this also in this kind of asynchronous manner. So normally I ask my students to pick a number, and number actually corresponds to one of the pages from this book that I recently found and was recommended for me through a professional development opportunity as a tool to kind of all of us connect with ourselves and make sure where we are in the life. Um, since I kind of anticipated that we might have a little lower attendance in this synchronous format today, I actually picked up a random number, and that number ended to the page number 196. And the thought that young Pueblo shares with us from his collection, or from a collection of his works, goes along the lines: your friends who have the courage to expand their wisdom and self-awareness, they are special. Keep them close. Obviously, we all are going to have a different interpretation what this thought means, but I think that for me, it really shows how learning and growing in our learning is a lifelong process. I've shared on few occasions in passing that my strong belief is that every good teacher should be going to the school every once in a while themselves. Only once you are a student, you remember what it is really to be a student. And for myself, it is pretty intense. There's a lot going on. I'm not gonna lie. Being a student is not always the easiest gig. There's a fair bit of that we ask from our students, fair bit that I'm realizing that's being asked from me, and I hope that that helps you to realize and know that I really appreciate everything you're doing. I really do appreciate that you're working so hard on these classes. Um, I keep being impressed every time I read your answers, every time I see the great work you're submitting in. I realize how we all have a lot going on in lives, and this class is only one small part of that. So keeping learning, being curious, expanding our knowledge is really something that I'm passionate about, and I appreciate each and every one of you for doing that. Remember, learning looks very different for everyone, like we saw early parts of our time together this semester. So find a way of learning that works for you and focus on that. I try to provide multiple different ways of learning, multiple different ways of presenting the material. You don't have to do everything. You can do what works for you. If you want to do everything, you're absolutely welcome to do so. And you're also welcome to go beyond what I offer to you as tools. So find what works for you. But throughout it all, please do remember that I'm incredibly proud of each and every one of you who are part of this class. You're really doing a fantastic job. So to have a look of our plan for uh, this week for the homework, I'm looking for us to do 4 different elements. So it's a little busier week than our average week. The 2 first elements are things that you are already familiar with from the past. So we're going to be doing a chapter quiz, and we're also going to be doing a chapter practice anatomy activity. You know that both of those are very, very worthwhile activities in terms of preparing for what might come up in the exam. But also, when I put together these quizzes and put together the practice anatomy activities, even though you complete them on the publisher's platform, I have gone through quite a lot of work to select and sieve and identify what are the key messages from that chapter. I would anticipate that the chapter homeworks, especially for the quizzes and practice anatomies, align fairly well with what I provide you as the key messages from the lecture videos and other sources that I share on the weekly learning module. Your textbook is vast, and I realize that. A textbook has been written in a way to serve many different audiences, so there's a lot to take in. Obviously, everything is important, but what's most important is what I'm highlighting on the materials that I provide for you, whether it's through learning, through the lecture videos, through the pages that I prepared for you on your learning modules, or whether it's through the assignments. Again, remember, you can use the quizzes and practice anatomies kind of as a guided reading activity as well. You don't need to just magically know every answer the first time you start taking this quiz or practice anatomy. Those guide your thinking, and you're looking on that material to what is important, what is crucial. This week, we're also getting to continue with an element that you've done before, and I think that many of us are finding quite enjoyable, which is those food for thought assignments. Food for thought assignments really give us a chance to kind of have a look of the concept we're talking about, but from a little different angle, and for you to put your own spin on it. So this week, I want to talk about a condition, a thing that sometimes happens when we're looking at the muscular system. We can get pulled muscles, and in this particular example, I'm focusing on pulled hamstrings. And I provided you some starting material, but I'm also encouraging you to do your own reading, do your own research, and just write me a short paragraph telling me what you've learned about pulled hamstrings. I do have some guiding questions that I use when I grade these assignments, that what are some of the things that I'm looking to see in those answers. And I'll try to make time today, since I'm not expecting that the actual summary of the lecture material is going to take super long, to show how I would approach food for thought assignments. Finally, the last element that I have for us for homeworks is going to be the simulation activity. And on this simulation activity, we're looking at different movements. I think that it's at the level of shoulder and elbow, if I remember correctly. These simulations are something new that I'm trying out this semester, and I really wanted to get your feedback and your experience of whether they're useful, whether they're helpful. And I appreciate everyone who took the midterm survey. I should have a little bit of a share out prepared shortly for you. I anticipate next week or so, to what I took away from your feedbacks and what changes am I implementing based on that. But one of the things that I kept hearing is that students are enjoying these simulations. So I'll definitely try to keep including those and keep including even more of those. You will notice that the simulations currently don't carry a huge amount of points, because I just wanted to be careful, since it's the first time we're trying something, that you can try them out, you can play with them, you can have an experience with them without stressing over the points. Obviously, I think that they are super useful assignments, and it seems that we're all kind of landing onto that same thinking. But however you collect the points on this course is, I try to leave a little bit of room for that, for you to choose activities, you to choose elements that really work for you. But these are the recommended assignments that I'm asking you to do this week. Obviously, if you choose to skip some, or if you choose not to do some and you choose to do other assignments instead, that is totally fine. You remember that I offer those extra credit assignments as one more activities at the end of each learning module. So you have that way of collecting points as well. Find a way that works for you. Do whatever works for you. If you miss assignments, usually I try to reach out to my students and just check in how things are going. But that does not mean that you're in trouble. Remember, you need to use the grading scale that I provided for you. And I think it says 91% of all the scores that are available. If you collect that, you get an A. And A is the best you can get in this class. So it doesn't have to be, everything doesn't have to be perfect. Everything just has to be enough for you earn to that grade percentage that then translates to that letter grade that you're after. And you know what you're after. You know what you're preferring to do. So let's have a look of a little bit of what I'm really wanting us to focus on this week. And what I'm really wanting us to focus on are the major skeletal muscles that we have in our body. And as I teach this chapter in face-to-face classes, it is a little easier since we have big human body models where we can study those muscles. We have, for example, I do with my students a lot of building of the musculature on the skeleton out of the clay. So that's kind of fun. We do a lot of things like that. In a virtual setting, it is a little different. So what I've done, I've provided you this actually the very same diagram you're seeing on this screen, which shows some of the most important muscles. I provided it to you as a handout on our learning module, both with and without labels. And I encourage you as you're studying the material to use that to guide you if that's your way of learning. Rather than me going through on this review session today, each muscle by muscle, pointing it out and naming it, potentially mentioning where it starts, where it ends, I think that that would be very, very boring, both for you and myself. Rather than doing that, what I've done, I've actually provided you a bunch of very short videos on the Canvas course. What I do, like I shared earlier on, I actually have my students in face-to-face classes to build a whole human body, and especially in terms of the muscular system, one muscle at a time on top of a skeleton. It's not quite life-size, but it's a very good technique. So you will be able to get partial experience of that by watching those videos. And as you're watching them, what I would ask you to pay special attention is that where does the muscle start and where does it end? What shape the muscle is? Does it have multiple endings, multiple starts? As you're looking at the shape of the muscle, the location of the muscle, what kind of a movement that muscle likely to produce as it contracts? What's the purpose of that muscle? Often muscles come also in pairs that we'll end up seeing. So try to have a look of that pair of muscles, and they often have opposite effect in terms of when they contract, creating two opposing movements. So that might be something that's also interesting to kind of try to connect. When I study muscles and when my students study muscles, one thing that I always emphasize to them is that it is okay to group muscles together, formulate compartments of muscles if they are similar muscles located at the same area and creating a similar movement. That might make it easier when you consider the muscles as groups together rather than kind of going through a list, just going one muscle by one muscle. That can become very, very boring. Try to connect that to that real world relevance. And I often encourage students try to kind of find out where it is in your body as well. So I encourage you to lean heavily on your material at the learning module as you're covering this week's material. And there's really good tables that your textbook offers to you as well. These tables list the actual muscles. They group them together and they show the origins, insertions, movements, shapes, and so on and so on. So as you're working through those, you might find it useful to use that very diagram that I provided for you. Obviously, you can find your own diagrams, but I find that rather than feeling overwhelmed with what's to cover, it is sometimes easier to cover it and make notes and kind of collect that information on the same sheet that you have in front of you. So that's one tip or one trick that I would encourage you to consider if it works for you. You choose what's good for you. But these diagrams, these are available for you as a handout, both without answers, but then also one with answers, so you can go back and check how it worked. I do realize, though, obviously, that studying muscles on a two-dimensional view, it is a little bit of a pain because muscles really are very three-dimensional, and we also get those many layers, whether we're more external or deeper within the body. So we're gonna do the best we can, and that's why I really encourage you to delve into those interactive resources that your learning materials offer for you, such as that stimulation. It allows you to kind of explore and go a little bit beyond just looking at a flat two-dimensional diagram, but get that more of an appreciation of how musculature and human body is much more three-dimensional or even four-dimensional, depending on who you ask and what you're looking at. So I think that that puts us in a very, very good place to have a kind of a shared understanding of what I'm looking for this week. And moving onwards, I wanted to give a couple of tips how to learn muscles. A lot of the time when we're looking at individual muscles, we can actually gain a lot of information simply by paying attention to that muscle's name. Anatomy is not incredibly creative field in a sense that a lot of the time the name of the muscle will explain to you exactly what that muscle is. It can explain many different things. It can explain what are the start and end parts of the muscle, where does it attach to, what kind of a movement the muscle does, what shape it is, what appearance it has, and so on. But pay attention to the muscle's name. And I'll expand on that a little bit in just the coming slides. But I really encourage you to use the muscle's name as a tool. Don't just rush through it and memorize it, but take the time to really think what each part of the name of a muscle means. I also encourage you to read the description that comes with that muscle, especially on those tables that your textbook offers. Try to identify the muscle. And by that, I'm meaning that try to connect what the material that you're using to learn provides you about understanding the location where the muscle is found, and also the description, what the muscle is provided from the muscle. Because rather than just memorizing a diagram where, oh, the third line that's blank is going to be this and that muscle, you really want to be able to transfer this knowledge to a real world setting. So that's by really identifying these muscles, whether it is from a diagram, whether it is if you have a luxury of having a model available for you. And as I say that, I do want to highlight that even if you're taking this class online in an asynchronous format, you are still very much part of our college. You're still very much welcome to use all the same resources that we provide for all of our learners. So our learning centers, our tutoring centers actually have a bunch of models, anatomical models, such as models of the musculature of the body. And you can go and revise those muscles also on those learning centers. So you'll find a bunch of muscle models, bunch of models of human body. And if you just ask from the staff at the learning center, they will more than happily pull out anything that's not already available and visible for you. Remember that we have these learning centers available at both of our campuses, both at the Pecos campus, at the library. I believe it's the second floor, the one floor up from the ground level when you climb up the steps, and you turn after the steps to the right and walk down the hallway or corridor, you'll see that there's many tutoring rooms, and you just look for the biology or science tutoring room, and you will find tools to help you learn. In case of the Williams campus, you will go again to the area that's right opposite to the library, that big glass building that we have there. And there we have tutoring rooms at the end of that hallway. Again, if they're not open, if someone's not there, don't give up. Go and check with the library folks. They're usually pretty amazing about finding ways to help you. So please consider that as a tool. Obviously, that's not required, but if you are a very hands-on learner, and if you are very much of a learner who would like to see things outside the textbook, that might be one source. Obviously, there's other places where you can see also anatomy models and so on. So find what works for you. But I would really encourage you to identify those structures, try to find them in many different diagrams, many different presentations. Really relate where they are located, what they look like, what you're being told about them. Another big thing at least for me as a learner, and what I find for most of my students, is that really we need to think about, why do we have muscles? What's their goal? What's the actions? What's the function that these muscles provide for us? So really don't just look at the start and an end and accept it like that. Think, okay, if these are the points that attach, what happens as the muscle shortens, as it elongates? What kind of movements are we creating? So really acting out the function of that muscle. Simply memorizing the functions, that's the first step that guides us to get started. But that's probably not going to be as rewarding learning experience as going beyond just memorizing, but trying to understand what that muscle contributes, what movements, what value do we get out of that. So that might be something to pay attention to, if that's something that works for you and if that's something that you're interested. Finally, my personal favorite way of learning muscles is really acting out those movements. So you have a great model, even if you don't have a chance to go to our campuses and get to those models that are available. You have a great model of a human body in yourself. So use yourself to act out, feel the muscles, understand the muscles that you're learning of. So in my face-to-face classes, in my exams where I see students in face-to-face classes, I often see students feeling their own body, feeling where these muscles are located as they're trying to remember the stuff and also as they're trying to learn this stuff. And I really think that that is a useful strategy. So I would encourage you to do that. Obviously, if you are very good friends, if you have a family member who's willing for you to look at their body and try to understand where those muscles are, that's also one way to do it. You'll definitely get to know the person whose muscles you're studying a little bit better. So that's something that you might consider if it really helps you. Find out again what's your learning style and what's most beneficial for you. I never want you to do something in this class that you find totally useless. I want you to do things that are beneficial for you. I want you to do things that you get something out of. So, on this slide, I mentioned about the fact that you can gain a lot of information about the name of the muscle. Let's have a look at that a little bit more with few examples. So when we're naming skeletal muscles, and I have some examples there on that kind of a teal color, bluish color of muscles, you'll end up seeing that a lot of those names have a Latin-based background. A lot of those words come from Greek or Latin languages. So initially, it might sound like I'm learning a whole different set of languages, whole different set of terminology than what I'm familiar with. But I really encourage you to put in the effort and time now, because as you will see in anatomy and physiology, these same terms will keep repeating. So putting in the effort once will save you the time later on when you end up seeing other structures that have similar names. So a lot of the time when we're looking at the names of these skeletal muscles, we see that for example, the name can provide you information about the location of that muscle. So this is where having learned all the bones that we just learned will really pay off, because a lot of the time the names of the muscles are related to those bones that they're attached to or that they're running along. So a good example of that would be, for example, our temporalis muscle. Temporalis muscle runs over the temporal bone. So we're seeing this usefulness of having put in that effort to learn that. Another thing that sometimes the name of a skeletal muscle gives us, it can describe us the shape of the muscle. I think that, for example, a good example of that would be the deltoid muscle, which is kind of a triangular in shape if you look at it. And this triangular shape, the word for that actually comes from the Greek for deltoides, for the triangle. So that gives us a clue about the shape of that muscle as we're looking at the muscle's name. It can tell us a little bit of a clue what shape that muscle would be. Another thing that we often see with skeletal muscles and names of the skeletal muscles is that the name of a muscle can also tell us the size of that muscle, especially when we have many muscles that are very alike. Often we have different versions of those in terms of what is the largest, what is the smallest, what is an intermediate one. So when we're looking at the size, I think that good example of that would be, for example, our gluteus maximus, the largest muscle of the butt. We also have gluteus minimus and gluteus longus and so on, if you were or we have other muscles that have minimus, longus, so on, so on. So it really gives us an idea of the size of the muscle. So that might be something that's useful for us as well. When we're looking at the muscle names, another thing that we sometimes see is the fiber direction of that muscle. So how fibers run within the muscle. So a good example of that, I think that, for example, would be rectus abdominis. So rectus really refers in the language of anatomy to these fibers when we're talking about skeletal muscles, where the fibers run straight. So abdominal muscles where the fibers run straight in a straight direction would be our rectus abdominis. We might have also muscles where we describe the fiber direction as a transversus. So this would be in a transverse angle to the relation of the muscle, or we can describe the fiber direction as an oblique. It's kind of in this weird angle that doesn't align with the three main body planes that we've learned in the past. So again, the name might give you a clue about the fiber direction of the particular muscle. A lot of the time we also see that the name might actually tell us the number of origins, how many starts, how many endings we have for the muscle. I think that biceps is a good example of that. We are having then 2 ends. Triceps, we have 3 ends. So you can tell the difference of these muscles already from the name to kind of start understanding that. We also see that often muscle name can actually list the attachment points that we have. So the locations where they connect to, whether it's an origin or insertion. One of my favorite examples of this would be, for example, the muscle known as sternocleidomastoid muscle. So that tells us that this muscle attaches at the sternum, at the clavicle, and also at the mastoid process, so forming this shape at the level of the neck. So 3 important attachment points that we're already getting out of the muscle simply by looking at the muscle's name. Another one that I have listed on here is that the muscle's name might tell us about the action. So named based on the, or named for the action that gets produced by that muscle. So a lot of muscles are either flexors or extensors. Are they reducing the angle between 2 bones, or angle of the joint being flexors, or are they extending, increasing the angle? So again, a lot of things that we can learn there simply based on the name of the muscle. Especially these flexors and extensors become useful when you're learning those groups of muscle. When there's multiple muscles, you end up seeing that often on that area you have flexors or you have extensions, and then you can kind of gain already some understanding of those muscles' function, but also which are complementary muscles that kind of come together. A lot of the time, one thing that I keep seeing when we're naming these skeletal muscles, that it's not just one of these characteristics that we might see in the name of the muscle. Often we combine multiple of these together. And I have a really fun example here, if we're looking at the combination of these factors that might help us to name a skeletal muscle. One of my favorite examples is extensor carpi radialis longus. So we're seeing from the name that this muscle will play a role in extending. It will be located at the level of the wrist, running along the radius, and it is a very long muscle. So we're getting a bunch of information simply from the name of the muscle. So I would encourage you to take that time and take that energy to really kind of unpack what the name tells us. So moving on a little bit from this concept of simply naming the muscles, we can also get a lot of information about the fascicle arrangement based that we see on the muscles that I wanted to mention. So some of the most common patterns that we end up seeing in terms of how the fascicles in the muscle are organized would be listed here. And we're going to start with the circular arrangement. Circular arrangement is kind of this ring-shaped arrangement we see, for example, around the orbicularis oris. This muscle band around the mouth forms actually a circular muscle band there. We would have other examples, orbicularis oculi around the eye. So here we're seeing that these muscle fibers really form this circular appearance. So that might be convenient for us. Sometimes we see that the muscle arrangement is convergent. So there's a really broad origin that we're seeing here that then converges into one point. I think that pectoralis major would be a really good example of that. We're seeing that large origin, and maybe I can show it on this large origin of this muscle, but then this muscle converges into one point that's then attaching there. So that is what we can also see in terms of the fascicle arrangement type. Another type of fascicle arrangement that we sometimes see is that we can describe the muscle fiber arrangement, fascicle arrangement, as being fusiform. So here we have kind of this spindle-shaped appearance where we have parallel fibers that run, but then they fuse into one end, either at one or both ends. So we have these very prominent spindle parallel fibers that then end up coming into one point. A good example of that I've highlighted here would be the biceps brachii. So you'll notice that even though we have that kind of the fleshy part of the muscle where all these fibers run together to the similar direction, they all come to the same point, attachment point that we're seeing there. If we're looking off the other examples, parallel arrangement of the fiber direction, that's a worthwhile to notice. So here we have literally these fibers are very, very parallel. A good example of that would be, for example, our sartorius muscle that we see that's kind of a long, thin band where all the fibers kind of run roughly to the same direction for nearly the entire length of the muscle. Another group that we sometimes see when we're talking about the fascicle arrangement is muscles that are described as being pinnate. Here, the fibers actually attach to a central tendon. And there's many different kinds that we can see when we're talking about that. Are we seeing just one central arrangement bipinnate, where so rather than having this unipinnate where we had just one set of these fibers attaching to a central tendon, maybe we have two, or maybe we even have multipinnate muscles. If I'm thinking of an example of this, I think a deltoid is a good one that we'll end up seeing. So I hope that that kind of helps you to have an idea that there's a lot that goes on when we're naming, when we're studying these individual muscles. And I know that we didn't get a chance to go through each and every single muscle by themselves, but I hope I gave you some tools that will help you as you start to do that work by yourself. And as you're starting to do that work by yourself, I do want to share a resource that I have available for you. So let me just jump out of this presentation so I can show it from the canvas for you. And I'm just going to jump to the same view that you would get as a student so that it's a little easier for you to follow along. And let's see if I can share my screen again for you. At this time, you should be able to see the same screen that it's very close to the similar that you would get when you land to our Canvas course and look in there. And let's scroll all the way to our this week's learning module, which is all about muscles. So week 10, chapter 10. And you'll notice that I have again the learning outcomes. I have the anatomic terminology that will help you, and I have some starting points for your food for thought assignments. I do also have some actual lecture videos, but the resource that I wanted to highlight, especially as you're going through these individual muscles that you have in the body, that we don't really have time as a lecture to go through one by one. Not only we don't have time, but it would be, like I said, incredibly boring for you, and it would be incredibly boring for me. What I've done, I've actually recorded you on that clay model that my students build, individual muscles, and I've grouped them. So for example, here, I'm building on this plastic skeleton some of the important skeletal muscles that we have here. And you always notice that I first draw where the attachment points are if it's a muscle that's complex. So I know that these are sped up. It's so that you don't have to wait super long as I'm building each muscle. But if you just pause, if you use them just as a resource, you can follow along as I build on this series of recordings, some of the most important muscles of the body. So you have those available on your Canvas course. You'll notice that I also spent some time adding the fiber direction. And there's going to be a bunch of these videos that you can refer to for each area of the body. I normally try to group these muscles kind of as clusters of the same region or same function. And again, this is one way how my students learn. Obviously, you identify what works for you. I will never tell to my students that everyone needs to learn in the exact same way, but I try to provide those resources. And I think that these videos do a fairly good job of going through pretty much all of the important body parts. We're spending a little bit of time at the beginning on the head and neck because there are so many important muscles, especially for our processes of communication, but also mastication and so on. But I will cover pretty much all parts of the body with these demonstrations of the important muscles that we find in the body. So use that as a resource. Use that if that helps you. I think that it's always nice to kind of have a few different versions of learning these concepts rather than just reading textbook. But if reading textbook is really your favorite way of learning, I absolutely am in full support. Do what works for you. Focus on what works for you. I just try to provide you different tools, different resources, different ways of learning the course material. It is really unique how we all learn. It is very different. If you all of a sudden fall in love with this approach of learning, I do this with a lot of my face-to-face students. So that is one resource that's available for those learners who want to join me and kind of do a little bit of art class along the anatomy class. It's never an issue that my students find that, oh, you need to be super skilled in fine arts, take my class. We're not looking for perfections. We're simply looking for process of learning. So I'm not asking you to produce the most perfect sculpture. I'm just asking you to do things, and as you're doing things, to learn about what you're doing. So I think that that's a rather nice resource, rather nice option that you have, in addition to just having to rely on a diagram or on a other kind of textbook table. You find what works for you. But this is the resource where I think that it's a little bit more interesting than just listening me pointing out structures on a pre-recorded video. Actually seeing these, looking at the shape of the muscle, thickness of the muscle, fiber arrangement, what kind of a movement that muscle would cause, and so on. A lot of my students do find these as kind of enjoyable and interesting as well. I do realize that they are a little bit sped up, and that's on a purpose, so that you can actually get through those, but you can pause at any stage. You can slow down, you can go backwards, forwards, whatever works for you. But I'm a big believer in doing things. Obviously, it is a little more challenging in an online setting, but this might be one resource that might be handy, that might be useful for you. I'm not gonna spend time of going through each and every single video. They are available there for you on the canvas. So pick and choose, do what works for you, find a way that works for you in terms of your learning process. That's most important for me, that you're getting what you're wanting to get out of the content. So I just try to provide different resources, different options, different ways of learning. I realize that we all have our own preferences and own techniques and own ways of learning. So that was some of the examples of the vast amount of different resources that I have on the canvas. But I want to spend a little bit more time discussing those assignments that we have also for you for this week. So I'm going to stop sharing this particular screen, and rather than showing this screen, let's have a look through a couple of other things that I want to mention regarding the assignments for this week. So let me just jump around to a different set of resources. Here we're just quickly gonna visit our listing that we saw earlier on about the homework for this week. So I want to spend just a second talking about the quiz and practice anatomy. So we'll peek onto those assignments as we've done before. But like I said, they're going to be very similar to what you've done before. These ones you will be completing on the Connect. So on our publishers platform. So let's have a look of those together. And again, let me just open my end of the sources that we can get to see the week 10 assignments. Stop sharing this screen and instead jump to a different screen. And let's have a look of a couple of examples of chapter 10 quiz. You'll notice that there's 18 questions. Sometimes students are like, oh my God, you went really crazy with the number of questions that you're giving us for this week. But really, remember, these are guiding your learning process. Since it is a little harder to teach the individual muscles through an asynchronous lecture, I really think it's useful as you learn them through activities and as you revise them through activities. So that's what this quiz is trying to guide us towards doing. So for example, here you're doing a drag and drop of classifying each of the muscles that are being shown to you, and these are real muscles in the human body based on their fascicle orientation. So we're seeing, for example, rectus abdominis having these parallel muscle fibers that are running to the same direction. So rectus abdominis is a good example of that. Fusiform muscles where we saw that we had this kind of a spindle shape of the muscle parallel fibers, typically in the middle, that then attach to one or multiple ends. Biceps brachii was a good example of that. We're seeing another muscle, this time it's a multipennate one. So the fibers attach to multiple central tendons in case of the deltoid muscle, circular arrangement. The ring-like arrangement. In addition to orbicularis oris that I used as an example, we have orbicularis oculi, this kind of a round muscle around the eye that we're seeing here. A bipennate example, so again, these fibers that attach the central tendon, in this case, two sets. So rectus femoris is a good example of that. In terms of the unipennate, again, these fibers that attach to single tendon, but this time we're looking just as one. Palmar interosseous muscle is a good one example of that. And finally, we're seeing the shape of the muscle as triangular. For example, pectoralis major would be a good one of that. I described that also as a convergent muscle. So sometimes you see a few different ways of describing muscles as well. We're not going to go through all of the quiz questions, but you'll see that I also have questions where you get to complete sentences. So here we're seeing you would drag the correct word to complete the sentence. The quadriceps femoris is a group of muscles that extend the knee and all insert to the patella. So that's our quads. The sartorius muscles action is to aid in both hip and knee flexion. So again, kind of a way for you to revise these muscles through some of the descriptions. Patella is connected to the tibia via patellar ligament. So again, with the muscles, also learning some of the ligaments becomes important. We'll see final example here. The rectus femoris muscle is the only muscle of the quadriceps femoris group that actually flexes the hip. So again, you're getting to learn about these muscles as you're working your way through these assignments. Use your resources. Use this as a guided activity. You don't need to have answers just out of the blue. This is all a learning process, and that's what I want you to get out of it. Here we're seeing the supraspinatus muscle that lies in the supraspinatus fossa of the scapula. So we're starting to connect the skeletal system that we learned and different bones and parts of the bones also with the muscles. Downward slippage of the humeral head when relaxed may indicate an injury of the supraspinatus muscle. We're even getting some of the pathology here. The lesser tubercle of the humerus is the distal skeletal attachment site for the subscapularis muscle. So again, learning those bones was so worthwhile as it makes your job of learning the muscles easier now. So I hope that that kind of makes it make more sense. We're seeing a lot more of these complete a sentence questions, but I also have other types of questions for you to tackle on this quiz. So I'll let you browse through that quiz by yourself and figure out, for example, here I'm showing nicely different groups of muscles that go together based on their location, based on their function. A lot of the time, learning muscles as these combined groups is going to be super handy and super useful for you. So hopefully you'll find that as a useful activity. The other activity that's familiar to you from the past, and I just stopped sharing just for a second until I'm able to open the right assignment. Other activity that I think, especially in terms of the muscles, is going to be really handy for us is to focus on the practice anatomy. So let me share a couple of examples of that before we move on. So for chapter 10, practice anatomy, again, I have quite a large number of questions. The reason why it's quite a large number is that really, like I said, I'm not doing a full-on lecturing of a particular muscles. I rather want you to use these resources to guide your learning. So let's have a look of some of these 21 questions. Here you're getting to name muscles in a diagram. Based on all that you learn, you drag them to the right places to name these muscles. And there's a bunch of these that you'll get to go through. I think it's going to be really, really useful for you to kind of review structures through that. And we have muscles at different depths also in the body. So these diagrams know some very superficial, some going deeper to the body, and allow you to get a more of a three-dimensional appreciation and more of a depth appreciation of the body in that way. So hopefully that's another resource that's going to aid you in your learning process. A lot of these are diagrams. I think that when we visually draw things, we can emphasize things a lot of the time. So that might be useful and that might be fun in terms of learning these things. Really, again, use these activities as guided learning activities. You do not need to know everything from jumping into an activity, but you need to be prepared and willing to kind of use that activity to guide your learning, to help your learning process. So there's going to be a bunch of these where you get to see. There's also more specific views of the muscles where you get to really spend time on a certain body part to gain a lot more understanding of the muscles that we find on those regions. A lot of it is memorization. I'm not going to lie. Anatomy and physiology has a tendency that there's quite a bit of memorization involved. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of what to expect from the homework. Again, I'm just going to show a few more just to give you an idea of what to anticipate, what could come up in the homework. And remember that exams and practicals were heavily leaning on to these. Let me just jump a little bit further. I want to show an example of here. We also have real dissection model pictures, so from a real human cadaver. So hopefully that also gives a different way of applying what you've learned as you're looking through these structures. So I think that that's a fun activity and fun way of learning, not just from diagrams, but seeing them on real real life setting. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second as I jump around. And what I wanted to talk about next, let's have a look of very briefly, and I'm again going back to share with you another assignment type that we have for this week. So let me share my screen. And we're again on our Canvas course, and we're finding this week's learning module. And for this week, as I shared, I'm also asking you to complete a food for thought assignment. You remember that for a food for thought assignment, I actually have a starting place for you. I provide a little bit of information, whether it's visual, whether it's articles, that kind of guide you of some of the things that you could look at as you're tackling the question that I have for you. But obviously, I encourage you to do also independent research and find resources that work for you, that make sense for you. But once you've had a look of these starting point for your thinking for the food for thought, you'll be able to access the assignment like before and submit the assignment as a written text. I have expectation kind of laid out clearly there that I'm looking for you this week in terms of discussing hamstring muscles and what happens when one of them gets pulled. I've given you some pointers what I would be looking for full marks answers. I'm looking of the location of the hamstrings in the body, typical causes of the pulled hamstring, symptoms of the condition, and first aid treatment. But I also think it's useful for you to see exactly how I'm grading your assignments. And how I'm grading these short answer assignments is by using a rubric. So you can literally see what am I looking to, what level of a detail for each of the things. Obviously, life is not quite as clear cut. So I use this rubric to do the initial assessment of the quality of your answer and depth of your answer. But there is a little bit of adjustment based on other merits or other things that might be missing. So this gives us a kind of a more of a even playing field that all assignments get graded evenly. But if you add more, if you go above and beyond, if your references are extremely good, if you're relating your own life examples to the material, they can bring up your grade as well. So this gives you an idea how I approach that grading process. So I hope that you will be able to find that a little bit more helpful, a little bit useful as you're tackling these assignments. So that's why I wanted to share that. And the final thing that we need to talk about in terms of the assignments for this week has to do with the simulation that I have for you. So let me just get that opened on my screen as well. And I'm wondering if I'm able to view it anymore at this point when we've started to work through it. It looks like I don't have the ability to do so, but let's at least have a look of where we'll find it. So again, I'm sharing my screen with you. And like I said, the final activity that I have for you has to do with this simulation where you actually really get to do a more of a virtual lab, learning about shoulder and elbow movements. And the lab is really, really well designed, I think. It guides you step by step what you can expect, how to work through it, how to tackle the content. So work through it if you find it interesting. Remember, it is not super high stakes in terms of the points, but it is a useful activity. I wanted to keep it low in terms of the points that we have associated with that, since I'm trying these out for the first time. If you want, as always, I do have these additional materials and additional assignments. They are not required. You do not have to do them. But if you feel like you want to go above and beyond, or there's one that really tickles your fancy that you're interested in, you can totally do these as well, and they count towards your final grade. They're not required, but they're extra credit assignments. If you missed points elsewhere, or if you choose not to complete one of the traditional homework activities, these are ways to earn points towards your final grade as well. So I try to give you multiple different ways to get those points. A final thing that I wanted to share with you, and let's get that opened, is going back to this familiar summary of what to expect this week. I hope that you have a better idea in terms of, especially I wanted to spend some time talking about these homeworks and how to really ace them. Like I said, I do realize that it is a very busy week. I realize that there's a lot to go through. So I encourage you to make a start on these material and on these assignments whenever you can. I would not leave it to the very last minute compared to some of the other weeks that we have had on this semester. This is a busy week. I totally own it and I want to be transparent of it. So I will be posting an announcement reminding you that please consider making a start early just because of the vast amount of material that we're covering on this week. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you can't get through all of the homework by the due date, reach out to me. We can figure out if there's something that can be done, if an extension is an opportunity. Obviously, I don't want to guarantee that automatically, but I am usually very, very flexible and very understanding of individual circumstances. But I also want to be mindful that once we move to the next week, there's a whole bunch of new material. So you don't want to be always catching up on it. But especially this week, since I know that there's so much material to cover, do not hesitate to reach out to me if you need a little bit extra time. I'll try to work with you. We'll find a way so that you get your assignments in. It really is not just getting assignments done. It's much more about you having a chance to go through that learning process and use those assignments to guide your learning. So, like I always say, I am here to help you to get whatever you want out of this course. That's my job. I'm very, very committed. My job is to assist you, to be a partner as you're going through this learning process. I'm not here to catch you out. I'm not here to throw curveballs or make things harder or mean. Nothing that I think that learning should be a positive, low stress environment. That's my philosophy. That's where I approach this assignment and this course with. And I hope that you know I'm on your side. I want to see you succeeding. So reach out to me. Let me know how I can help you. And I think that this is a good time for us to wrap up our weekly get together. I hope you have a very good week. Like I said, if you do have a chance to make a start of the assignments earlier rather than later, and make a start of the learning process earlier than rather than later, that would be recommended just simply because it is a busy week that we have this week. I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to wish you a very happy week and let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. Until we see next time. Bye.